Good morning and welcome to the Parent Life Podcast. This is a ministry for parents trying to raise their children with godly principles and a Christian perspective. We're a ministry of Fruit Cove Baptist Church. Every week we try to release a 10 to 12 minute video that can help you in engaging conversation with your child. This week our guest is again Pastor Tim Maynard, lead pastor at Fruit Cove Baptist. We refer to him as PT, and so we're glad to have you back this week.
Thanks, Jason. I appreciate it.
So today is Inauguration Day, and let's just say this past year has been a little contentious, maybe some controversy, and for all of our listeners who are not Americans, just so you know, this is the day when our future president is sworn in and will soon begin his 4-year term. And if you've watched the news at all, you know that that's not been going well for the last couple months. So I really don't want to talk about the inauguration process or all that. I really want us to talk about, okay, as a parent, how do we engage with our children for praying for our leaders, especially if you're in a situation that you don't necessarily agree with that leader? So how do we do that? And then how do we also respect them as God would have us respect them?
Okay. All right. Great questions and an important day. We have been on a long journey to get here. And it is certainly, I think everybody's going to hopefully breathe a sigh of relief when things are kind of resolved now and we move on to the next whatever election cycle's coming up. But at any rate, I think it's really important, Jason, in my thinking through this season that we have been in especially, that we as parents continue to remind our children of how important democracy is. You know, and I don't want this is not a political science lecture, I'm not good at that. But I think that part of the misunderstanding that has come about as a result of all the contentiousness that's been happening is, I think our children are walking where they're watching this. And I remember watching in fact, the first time I went with my mother, and she didn't really go into all the detail of what we were doing, but she had to walk. We were walking across this field from our street to the next street over, which is where the polling place was. And she was walking across, and she told me, she said, we're going voting. I thought she said boating, and I kept looking for the water. I didn't know what voting meant.
Where's the boat?
I thought there's no boat. It was really disappointing. But at any rate, kids are watching. They are paying attention to what's happening and how we're going about this and what we're saying about this and how we are respecting or disrespecting people in authority. And this is where we need to be very careful as parents. Nothing wrong with having your opinion. Nothing wrong with having a different opinion than everybody else has. However, you need to be conscious that your opinion is being picked up by your child and being heard by your child. And if you are not wanting to indoctrinate them with your point of view alone, then you've got to be pretty careful about how you're handling yourself through this. But one of the things that I see in the Bible, and I've read this passage several times and aloud in the past weeks and days and months, and in 1 Timothy chapter 2, you've heard it, no doubt, but let me read it again, 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. First of all then, I urge that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgiving be made for all people, for kings, and all who are in high positions, that we may lead a peaceful and quiet life, godly and dignified in every way. Wow. So here's what we hear. This letter was written, 1 Timothy was written a little bit later, probably post AD 50, probably somewhere around AD 60. I think Paul died somewhere around 63. So this may have been somewhere in that very latter period of time. Right. Now, at that particular period of time, some of the most raging persecution that was about to happen to the church had not yet happened. But the church was, at this period of time, still beginning to be marginalized and still beginning to be politically marginalized and pushed aside. And I think people were starting to realize that this church is a real threat to the. It was growing, and slaves were coming in by thousands to become part of the church, and people were starting to go, okay, this is getting kind of scary. So they were pushing back, and there was there were some things beginning to happen. Sometimes Christians would be intimidated and arrested, maybe and put in prison for a time. Something like this happens in Haiti occasionally. They'll imprison a pastor just to shut him up.
Make
or
a
this.
statement, yeah.
So that kind of thing. It's not persecution per se, but it is a systematic way of saying we're going to shut you down. We want you to stop. But in this context, and as we've read this on, and as the first Christians received this and then began to pass that on down to the next decade or two, it landed in the middle of persecution. It landed in the middle of, I got to go, Neil and I got to visit Ephesus a couple of years ago in Turkey, and we got to walk into the ancient city of Ephesus. But before you get into the city, before you get too far into the official part of the city, there is an area that was a government area where tribunals would be held, where trials would be held, where people would be brought in that were suspicious and to be cleared to allow them access to the city. So it was the literal gateway of the city. But in the middle of that, and now this was the guide telling us this, in the middle of that there was an altar. There was just a rock kind of built up, still there, apparently authentic. And they said, on that altar there would be burnt offerings made to, of animals and different kinds of, as an offering to Caesar. You would actually go there to pledge your loyalty to Caesar, and that was part of what they would require before you come in. You have to be willing to say, Caesar is Lord, and this is, and you would put incense on that altar as a part of your pledge.
Just to get into the city.
Yeah,
wow.
just entry to the city. Well, Christians would not do that. And there were occasions that she said, it was not commonplace, but she said there were occasions when Christians would be burned on that altar because of their refusal to say Caesar is Lord, to say Caesar is God. Yeah, and they wouldn't do that. So these are the people reading those words. You got to understand, these are the people that are going, well, my friend Jason tried to get in Ephesus and he wouldn't bow before Caesar, and they burned him.
And he didn't make it, yeah.
But I'm still supposed to pray for these people. I'm still supposed to pray.
It's a lot stronger than the situation we might find ourselves in.
I still need to pray for this, and Paul would answer yes. I urge you to pray for kings, for all people, but for kings and those in positions of high authority over us. And that, when the person that is the king or the president or the person in position of high authority, and I always think when I read this, I think today about how do the Christians in China pray for the dictator that is bulldozing their churches and tearing the steeples off their churches and throwing their pastors and people in prison and keeping bad lists of people that are going to church services? Do they pray for this dictator? Paul would say yes.
Yeah.
All right. Now let's bring it back to America. You don't like the president right now. This was not the person you voted for. This was not your favorite. This was not what you thought would be in the best interest of America. But at this point in time, it's time for you to lay your political flag aside, and you get down on your knees as I'm a Christian, and I will pray for this person. I don't have to like them.
Right.
It doesn't even say here what you are to pray. There are 4 different kinds of prayer: supplications, prayers, intercession, and thanksgiving.
The last one's kind of hard.
That's a tough one, and you may have to swallow hard to say, we need to give thanks. That maybe, yes, we have a leader that we may not particularly agree with on everything, and over the past year, you've had a choice of leaders, some that you have deeply agreed with, and some that you've deeply disagreed with, and yet here we are. We've survived. And that may be the case. We may be in a season now. You may not at all agree with the president in positions and policies that he may have. But we are to pray. We are to pray. And that prayer, if you want to pray, if you think the person is not even a Christian, well, then pray for their salvation. Pray for their family. Pray for, So we pray. We are to pray. That we may have the blessing of living a quiet and godly life. And I think everybody's ready for a little bit of quiet and godly lives right now. So that's what I would hope that would happen. All right,
Well, thank you for joining us today as we talk through how to pray this Inauguration Day. I would encourage you, parents, actually model this before your children. Take time, maybe when they come home from school or before you go to bed, or if you watch this before they go to school. Do this around breakfast table and just pray over the leaders with thanksgiving. Pray with intercession that they might come to know the Lord if they do not. and really set that standard in your family of what it means to be a Christian and to honor people and respect people, because we're honoring and respecting the Lord who allowed them to be in power. So thank you again for being with us, Tim. Next week we've got Doug Koweski coming. He's the director of the Cove Ministry here at the church, a brand new family counseling ministry that we just launched this month. So you're definitely going to want to tune in next week for that. Our podcast is available on Apple, Spotify, Google, and the video version is on YouTube. Thank you very much for joining, and we'll see you next week.